And welcome to another edition of the Kindred podcast. Sometimes even after 5+ years and 10 seasons, loud brag, it surprises me that we do a podcast sometimes. You know what I mean? I'm like, we do all this work and then I'm like, oh, it's actually really is just, it's a podcast, which is thanks to you, I'll say, and the true crime genre. You're the one who got me into podcasts at the very beginning.
Yeah, you're welcome. Mm-hmm.
You said, you're so dumb. Why don't you listen to podcasts? I'm like, I don't know what that is. And you're like, well, that's really dumb. Why don't you listen to some
really
podcasts?
Dumb.
Now this is what I do all the time. This is my
Look
life.
At that.
It's
Check
my life's
that
work.
Out. Yeah.
I combine. I love that my sister.
How are you going to thank me?
My...
I wonder.
I'll get you a special gift. I'm going to get you some special gifts. Maybe from the from nature.
Fine.
Do you need any more rocks? I like to collect rocks. Do you have? I'm pretty sure you might have enough of your own.
I mean, you know,
a rock.
Listen, doesn't?
Don't shame rock people. Never mind. Let's move on. That's a whole other conversation. We should do a Kindred Plus. Just kidding.
About rock collectors.
Yeah, that's fun. It's way better than coins. Sorry to all the coin people, but you know how.
No offense.
No offense.
No offense.
I bet yours are way cooler. I will say today we are talking about none of those things, and that's a happy thing, and I'm grateful for that. No true crime or rock podcasting here.
Not today.
Not today. But this episode is a little magical, I'll say. We are heading to a place where pine cones are wax coated. Didn't know that. And larch trees roam, and where you can bounce on the forest floor. And I'm fairly sure after being at one of these spaces and hearing all about this space that Hansel and Gretel was real. That's what I'm saying.
Now, the bouncing on the forest floor, I know that where we go camping in West Virginia is not a boreal forest, but there's parts of that property where you bounce on the moss.
The moss is very bouncy, yes, because it's very old and very, very thick. Yeah, it's really beautiful. So that's true. Yeah.
I didn't want to say that, but yeah, it's a cool thing if you've ever bounced on moss. Like it's so thick and deep and
it's very cool.
Lush.
Especially when you're a little kid. It's real fun.
All right, as an adult, last time I was there,
you just told me you're climbing trees now for a living, so there you go.
Not for a living. No one's paying me.
I'll pay you. Just do videos. That can be your new Kindred content.
I'll just
Jennifer in the wild.
Send a video from 150 feet up in a beach tree. Yeah.
Oh, that'll give you a heart failure. All right. Anyway, moving on. This is the best intro ever. We are genuinely bringing you an amazing guest today to talk about one of these most important ecosystems that exist in our planet. And this is another episode where we are covering one of the bigs this season, an ecosystem that makes one of the biggest impacts on carbon sequestration.
Sequestration.
Yes, thank you for that. And
you made it equestrian, because you like horses. Sequestrian.
Horses. But we're not talking about them today either. So, and just correct me if I'm wrong, but so far this season we've done redwoods and giant sequoias and buffalo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is another one we're calling the bigs, these gentle giants, but these amazing spaces. But before we head into this magical space, I wanted to let you know that if you'd like to support our podcast, you can sign up for a free trial run. I think for a week or a month, I think you get a free trial. And for only $3.99 a month, you can make a massive difference to our little solo funded podcast. And if you'd like more content on all things animals and nature, certainly head to our Instagram page, The Kindred Pod, where we cover our guests and so much more. Okay, ready for our guest introduction?
I'm ready.
Okay, me too. So today we are covering, if you haven't guessed, boreal forests. And to educate us all about these incredible forests, we have asked forest ecologist Dr. Jennifer Baltzer to introduce us to this amazing terrestrial biome, I believe is what it is. Jennifer is a professor of biology at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Canada. She is also the Canada Research Chair in Forest and Global Change at Wilfrid Laurier University, which is a research program focusing on the impacts of climate change resulting in things like wildfire intensification and permafrost thaw on boreal forest ecosystems, which is a big deal. Um, this is a fascinating conversation. I
Yeah, it
felt
was.
like she had so much information and we only sort of scratched the surface, but Jennifer covers some of the most interesting aspects of boreal forests and all the changes they're coming up against in the face of, rapidly changing climates. And this ecosystem is so diverse and as it turns out is one of the biggest carbon storehouses on the planet. So we sure owe it to them to care for them and know about them.
Indeed.
And we'll be calling Dr. Baltzer Jennifer and you Jen in this episode because obviously we got two Jens
Got complicated.
today.
Yeah.
I know. I love it. I love it, Jennifer. So thanks so much for being here. Please subscribe and follow us. Please rate and review us. And please, please share our episodes, most importantly, with your friends and family. They will thank you. I promise. It's not like a mean thing to do.
No, it's not like a mean thing. We can't promise they'll thank you. They will, I'm sure, enjoy it, but
They
they
will
might not
enjoy
thank
it.
you.
That's
Depends
right.
on their manners.
That depends on their manners. And definitely check out Jennifer at Wilfrid Laurier's website, which is wlu.ca, for more information on her work and just the incredible work that the university is doing. So let's now go visit the forest crown of the planet, which she'll explain what that means. So thanks for listening and lots of love. Dr. Baltzer, welcome to Kindred, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Kate. It's great to be here.
Would you please introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Yeah, my name's Jennifer Baltzer. I'm a professor of biology and the Canada Research Chair in Forests and Global Change at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, in Canada. And I'm a forest ecologist. I work at this point in my career, I work predominantly in boreal forests, so high latitude forests that we're going to be talking about today. But I've spent my career working in forests from the tropics all the way up to the tree line.
Oh, wow. Amazing. And you mentioned you're in Wilfrid Laurier University. That's in Ontario, Canada?
Yeah, in Waterloo, Ontario.
Okay, great. And how did you get, what got you into forest ecology and boreal forests?
Yeah, so when I was, I did my undergraduate degree at Acadia University in Nova Scotia.
Okay.
And very quickly after starting my degree, I got hired into a research lab, a plant ecology research lab. And I was mostly working on salt marshes and salt marsh plant conservation. And then when I went to start grad school, this took me to a forestry department, to a forest ecology lab, and I started working in tropical forests. And so I spent a lot of years in Southeast Asia, working in the tropics, working on aspects of climate change impacts on tropical forests and tropical biodiversity. And then when I came back to Canada to start my first faculty position, I really wanted to start working on questions that were more relevant to Canadian forests. And this is where I started to transition into Canadian forest ecosystems, and the biggest one here is boreal forests.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a great quick path and amazing. Well, thank you for being here. I've wanted to speak with someone about boreal forests, so I'm really excited to digging into these magical spaces. So a few years ago, I was in Acadia National Park in Maine. And although the forest there is not strictly boreal, correct? Like there's some overlap, I think. Correct me
Yeah,
if
it's
I'm
kind of
wrong,
at
but
the interface between
okay.
boreal and temperate. And so we
Right.
call that Hemi-Boreal forest. It has some components of the boreal system, some components of the temperate system.
Oh, Hemi. Oh, that's great. Okay, I'll write that
Yeah.
down. And so I I I was just walking through it was like being in a moody fairy tale, and I was just struck by the feeling of the ground and the
Yeah.
light and the quiet and the sound and just how ancient it all felt, and it just ignited this sort of inspiration to take a deep dive into boreal forests. And I will add that We also wanted to talk about boreal forest this season because we are covering a few of the biggest animals and sort of, ecological systems on the planet. We're calling the bigs, and this is one of those, based on size and impact. So thank you so much for being here and digging into this magical space with us. Okay, so Jennifer, and I will just say I'm going to refer to you, Dr. Baltzer, as Jennifer, and Jen, my sister, will be Jen today because we got two
Sounds
lovely
great.
Jennifers here. Um, if you would, I'd like to start this conversation with just an understanding of what a boreal forest is and what separates them from other forests. It's a type of terrestrial biome and a vast
Mhm.
ecological with a vast ecological diversity, and I believe plays a critical and reciprocal role to not only the animals that live within this specific ecosystem, but to the planet at large. But in order to understand that role, talk to us about the fundamentals and key ecological characteristics of a boreal forest, where they grow, and just why they are so important.
Yep. So I like to think of the boreal biome as this green crown around the top of the planet. It encircles high latitudes of the planet. It's the largest, one of the largest forested biomes on the planet, and certainly the
Mm.
largest intact forested biome. There's very few people in relative terms who live in this region, and so it is still one of those areas of the planet that has a relatively small human impact in it,
I
from
like
a
that idea
sort
of
of
the
direct human impact.
Okay, and I like that idea of the green crown at the sort of the top of the planet. That's a really great way. So it kind of gives you geographically where these forests are as well. That's really helpful.
Yeah, so above the boreal are Arctic ecosystems, so those open, barren tundra lands, and below it are the temperate forests and grasslands that many of us in Canada and the U.S. live around. And
Okay.
so yeah, the
Mhm.
boreal forest, the boreal biome, one of the, I guess, characteristics of it is the long cold periods that this biome has to endure. So 6 to 8 months of really cold winter conditions, and so it's a cold climate, it's high
Mhm.
latitude. Many parts of the boreal have little daylight during the winter, lots of daylight during the summer. Some of the places that I work in have almost 24 hours of daylight in the summertime when we're working there, and have almost 24 hours of nighttime
Wow.
in the winter.
Yeah, that makes
So it's a,
sense.
a really extreme climate. It's really extreme in terms of
Yeah.
day length and photo period. And so not surprisingly, there's, in terms of who can live there, it is really limiting because it's a pretty harsh environment to live in. Um, because it's cold so much of the year, and the winter time is such a dominant component of this system. You know it the, the soils are cold. We have much of the boreal biome is underlain by permafrost. This is ground that's at or below 0 degrees, so
Mm.
frozen soil. So even if it's 30 degrees above ground, if you dig a hole in the ground and reach your hand down in, you'll feel
Oh
frozen
wow.
ground.
Oh
Wow.
wow. Like how
Yeah,
Wow.
it's
wow, that's
it's
wild.
pretty amazing, and it's not everywhere. So it's discontinuous in places, it's continuous in other places, but this frozen soil has formed a foundation for boreal and tundra ecosystems for millennia.
Okay.
And so this is not surprisingly, again, you've got cold climate, you've got these frozen soils. The soils that plants grow in are cold, they're wet, they're acidic, they're really tough places to live. And because of that, there are certain plant species that do really well in these environments. That they're plants that tend to, be able to hold on to resources really well, be pretty stress tolerant, not require a lot in terms of resources. And so this system is dominated by needle-leaved,
Mm.
predominantly evergreen conifers. Also larch, which loses its leaves. It's one of my favorite genera. It's a really interesting conifer that actually drops its leaves in the winter, kind of like a broadleaf deciduous species, but it's
Right.
got needles like a conifer. So it's this really, and that covers much of Siberia.
Yeah.
It's
Oh
also an
wow.
important player in North America, but the evergreen conifers are much more important in the North American boreal. So
So that
you've
that
got
makes
these,
sense
yeah.
when you're thinking too about like these needles. These trees are dropping their needles, and that's contributing to that thick layer you were talking about. Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And so here in North America, though, it's mostly evergreen conifers. But these conifer species tend to be more resource conservative. Their wood is able to deal with the freezing temperatures without getting damaged as readily as some of the broadleaf deciduous taxa. So there are special adaptations of these evergreen species, these conifers, to the cold climates, the poor kind of resource, the sort of low productivity ecosystem that the boreal represents. So we tend to have pines, spruces, larch, fir. These are really dominant species, and then a handful of tree species that drop their leaves, so aspen and birch and alder. And so from a tree species perspective, it's pretty low diversity. And often people think of the boreal biome as being fairly low diversity system, but I'm going to sort of take you up above the boreal. And if you think about kind of flying around over top of it, what we see is this kind of amazing mosaic of land cover types. And so there are forests. There are lots of forests. We talk about boreal forests. There's lots of different forest types. Because disturbances play such a big role in this ecosystem, so wildfire and widespread pest outbreaks, there's a real mosaic of forest ages and structures and composition that you see kind of this patchwork across the landscape. And then mixed in with that are an amazing diversity of wetland types. There's various types of bogs and fens and swamps and marshes. And then the whole landscape is riddled with lakes. So in the North American boreal alone, I think there's somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million lakes or something along those lines that are decent sized lakes. Yeah. So when you're up above the boreal, the whole landscape kind of sparkles on a sunny day because there's so much water on the landscape, both in the lakes and the wetlands, yeah, it's really this kind of amazing patchwork of different land cover types that hold a tremendous amount of diversity and can support lots of different other species. So that's a bit of a primer to boreal forests, I suppose.
Oh, that must be so beautiful. So I just am curious, like getting into the ground, like what is that called? I looked it up and it some people were calling it the duff, this sort of like this, is that what it's called? The layers of ground and sort of detritus that are made of like lichen and conifer needles, like you're saying, leaves, mosses, all these things. And then the permafrost is below that.
Yeah. So for your listeners who have been to a boreal forest, they'll be familiar with the fact that when you're walking around, there's a lot of moss on the ground.
Yes.
And in some places, it really feels quite springy. The moss layer feels quite springy.
It really does. I just have to say, that's when I felt like, where am I? I was like, it was bouncy. And I'm like, what is this made of? What am I walking on? And it was incredible.
Yeah. And so what happens, to go back to that kind of previous conversation about the climate, these soils are cold. They're underlain by permafrost in many places. And even where they're not, it's a very cold, long winter. The soils are cold. There's not a huge amount of energy coming into the system, so water doesn't evaporate really quickly from this system necessarily. And so the soils tend to be wet.
Okay.
And they tend to be fairly acidic because of the tree species that grow there. So these needle-leaf conifers, their litter is very acidic. And so we have these very acidic soil conditions, wet, cold, acidic. These are conditions where decomposition or the breakdown of plant material doesn't happen very fast.
Right.
And so you've got these mosses growing on the ground surface, and they grow upward. And so you've got a living green layer, but underneath that is a dead layer of moss that, because of those cold, wet, acidic conditions, it doesn't break down.
Right. So layers and layers and layers. And then you have feet of this spongy, squishy, bouncy cushiony ground layer. And like you're saying, you can dig through and get to like the ice, the permafrost, which is wild.
Yeah, or in some places you dig through and you hit mineral soil. And mineral soil is the kind of soil that most of your listeners would imagine soil being. So the first time I went to a boreal forest, I was really like, what is this soil that I'm walking on? And we call it the soil organic layer because it's soil that's made out of organic material. And yeah, as you mentioned, that can be tens of centimeters, a few centimeters or tens of centimeters thick, but it can also be many meters thick. In some places, you're walking across the landscape, maybe it's an open fen, and you're walking on a really thick peat mat, and the whole thing is shaking underneath you. It feels like you're a giant walking across the landscape.
It
In other
does.
places, in other
Yeah.
places in these bogs where you may have meters of organic soil and it's really loose and wet, you can sink in to your knees, up to your waist. I've
Sure.
had to be pulled
Yeah,
out of these.
I
The
would
word
imagine.
mire
Yeah.
comes from that,
Mm,
getting mired in something.
interesting.
We
Right.
refer to, in some parts of the world,
Yeah.
they refer to bogs as mires. So
Okay.
there's
Mm.
interesting connections between, these bog landscapes and words we have in the English language. So these
Yeah.
these
That's
places
interesting.
with deep organic soils and those deep organic soils lock in a tremendous amount of carbon.
Yeah, right, right. So these are these layers are where this carbon store is held, and we'll get to that. So and just again, in my mind before we spoke last time, I kind of was thinking of taking that sort of above ground, and I'm just like I just sort of thought of flying over a bunch of trees that look the same and not really understanding um how complex this whole system is and what it supports and all of that. And and even just like, these different layers and the cycles that they go through are so fascinating. And these, I guess, depending on that, the sort of undulation of where and how, there's also all kinds of different, shrubs and fruiting shrubs and, animals and all kinds of different species that are going to live in there, correct? Like depending on where you are, depending north or
Yep.
south of that type thing.
Well, and also east and west, there's certain species that
Yeah.
occur only in the east and certain
Yes.
species that occur. So there are
Right. Yeah.
biogeographic differences,
Right.
and whether the boreal forests are up in the mountains, so
Makes
we have,
sense.
a different pine in the mountains
Yeah.
than we have down in the lowlands. So there
Right.
are,
Mhm.
differences across the region. And then once you get into the Eurasian boreal forest, it's different again. Yeah.
Totally
It's
different.
really
Yeah.
this, I mean,
Mhm.
it's really
Okay. Cool.
fascinating. So Jennifer, now I'd like to dig into the critical and reciprocal relationship between these forests, animals, and humans, right? So boreal forests support not only the ecological systems that exist within them, but impact the overall health of the planet. These forests play a massive role from carbon storage and release to creating an ecosystem that so many species depend on, like we're talking about, depending on where they are. So, talk to us about the supporting role boreal forests play as part of such a diverse ecosystem and the impact they make on this planet overall.
Yeah. And so this links back to our conversation about those lovely, magical, springy soils. From a planetary perspective, the biggest impact that the boreal biome has for people around the world is its role in carbon storage.
Okay.
So the boreal biome is a vast biome, and those soils. So even though when you think about a boreal forest, there are these small trees, often pretty sparse. Like there are they tend to be short. They tend to be fairly open canopies. So there's not a lot of carbon stored above ground. You think of a tropical forest and these towering trees. You can just imagine the
Right.
carbon.
Yes.
All of the action happens below ground in
Mhm.
boreal forest.
Interesting. I've never thought of it that way.
Very
Right. That makes
interesting.
sense. Why? Because I
That
think of
is
these
very
trees as tall,
interesting.
but no, they're not. They're not. Yes. Wow. And different leaves, all the things. Wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and so 80 to 90% of the carbon in boreal forest is stored below ground.
Right.
And because of these deep organic stocks in the ground, these deep organic soil layers, the boreal biome stores comparable amounts of carbon to tropical forests.
Wow. Right.
But it's just stored in a different place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so 30 to 40% of all of the terrestrial carbon on the planet is stored in these boreal forests. So that's about twice as much
Wow.
carbon as we have in the atmosphere.
Wow.
Did you say 30 to
Um,
40%?
Mm-hmm.
yep.
Wow. And there's
Yeah.
not like
Uh-huh.
tons of boreal, like that's a lot of, they're working hard for, that's amazing. That's a lot of carbon store.
Yeah, and so it's a really critical ecosystem service.
Mhm.
Part of that is the fact that a lot of that carbon is locked away in frozen soils.
Right.
Part of that is the
Yeah.
cold climate that just keeps everything sort of very slow and, doesn't allow microbes to act on that soil organic matter very quickly. And so things get locked away. So we've got this kind of amazing carbon storage mechanism that has helped us for a very long time.
Right.
And that's a big concern to people, understanding how that works and how it works in the face of changing environmental conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And so
Mhm.
sort of thinking about it in the forest to the animal sort of reciprocal relationship that they have, like this system is home for many different animals, right? We've got different mammals, fish, birds, insects, lichens, all of these different species depend on the forest ecosystem. So depending on the
Mhm.
health of it, depends on who can be there and where and how, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so different players in the boreal biome, whether you're talking about, whichever species group you're most interested in, they'll thrive in different parts of this system. So we have, fires that burn through, and some animals are really well adapted to really early, post-fire environments. Others are really well adapted to these
Mhm.
mature forests that have had a much longer time since fire. Different wetlands support different species in lots of different ways. And so, yeah, this patchwork of land cover types is essential for maintaining the broader biodiversity of the boreal biome. And those local conditions are what are really important for people on the ground who rely on wildlife
Mhm.
species, on plant species for parts of
Right.
their livelihoods. Yeah.
Existence. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Right. And
Mhm.
that, right,
Yeah.
exactly. So you've got this sort of, it's just so dependent and so intricate. And I think these things that sort of throw them out of balance it's critical to understand these systems, to understand, we'll get to that, the challenges that they are facing. And I think that it's such a broad, like we're talking about, lynx and caribou and just all kinds of, I mean, depending where you are, like you say, with this sort of where and when are you. Um, but just how important it is to know how much we as humans, and you were saying humans don't necessarily live in all of the parts of the boreal forest, but there's enough of interplay between the two. So you have us interacting and relying on these systems and the animals and plants that are there, but also it's dealing with our carbon. This is the other thing, and I think that's what we wanted to talk to you about too, is just how important a system like this for carbon store and release is, and that sort of cycle that we talk about is just so important.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think we touched on that already, but the quantity of carbon the boreal forest has acted for a very long time as what we call a carbon sink. So a
Mm.
part of the landscape that more carbon goes into than comes out of. Um,
I was
yeah.
going to ask about that. I was going to ask if it's slower to release it because of it being
Well,
Well,
and
it's not
stored
that it's
in
slower to
Jennifer
ground.
had,
release it, but that,
Then
yeah, it's
no,
not,
go
sorry,
ahead.
it's not that it's slower to release it, but that more is locked away than is released through the various processes that carbon dioxide and methane and these things are released.
okay.
So we sort of think about it as
Okay.
the net balance, how much goes in, how much comes out. And for a very long time, the boreal biome has been a very, very effective sink, helping to offset our own emissions, and keeping the climate more
Hmm.
stable for us.
And Jennifer, when
Right.
we talked
Okay.
last, and again, we'll get into this in a second, but you talked about something called legacy carbon. So Jen, it was just like, again, like, and I love the idea that the carbon sink, that's helpful to me, but this legacy carbon can be stored for up to 100 years. Is that right?
Even longer in some places, but
Okay.
yeah, one of the things I think that we were talking about was this idea, again, of kind of this slow buildup of the organic soil layer. And so fire, as we talked about already, is a really important disturbance agent in the boreal forest. Another sort of
Yeah.
novel thing about
Right.
these soils is compared to the mineral soils many of us are accustomed to, is that soils made of plant material burn.
Right.
And so they
Yes.
actually act as fuel during a fire. So we have fires that happen up in the trees that people think about. There's also fire that happens in
Mm-hmm.
the soil layer.
Right. Right.
And so, yeah.
Interesting. Oh, wow.
Oh,
That's so
it's
different.
wild. And
That's
that's the next
really
thing I want to
wild.
talk about. So we're here. So let's dig into what are the challenges boreal forests are facing, right? And the ecological systems and species they support face in context to climate change, changing temperatures, fire. I want to dig into that. And this permafrost and the permafrost thaw, it's a unique and complex system that until I don't know, maybe a century or so ago, seemed to live in a managed cyclical reciprocity that could recover from environmental events in a healthy and sort of methodical and systematic way. But today, rapidly rising temperatures and escalating natural events are forcing boreal forests into challenges that they may not be able to adapt to or recover from. So talk to us about these challenges they're facing and how are they coping with them? And let's keep going with fire.
Yeah, so well, I think I would actually take a step back
Okay.
to climate change, because one of the things that we all know that the planet is warming, that humans are emitting greenhouse gases that are causing the planet to warm at a rate that we haven't seen in a very long time, and this warming is not happening evenly across the planet. So there's something
Right.
referred to as Arctic amplification. And so we have much more
Mm.
rapid warming happening at high latitudes
Hmm.
than lower latitudes. So just as an average number, Canada, a high latitude nation, is warming at twice the rate of the global mean rate of warming.
Oh,
So
wow. I
Canada's
did
warming
not
two
Oh,
know
times
wow.
that.
faster
Wow.
than the planet as a whole. And
Oh, wow.
Arctic regions, like the
Wow.
tundra regions, are warming 3 to 4 times faster than the planetary mean. So
Wow.
very rapid high latitude warming. And
Wow.
yeah, so change is happening much, much faster in these high latitudes for lots of reasons that we probably don't have time to get into.
Right.
But it
Right.
means that there's change happening faster there. So really rapid warming. We're also seeing increases in precipitation, but those increases in rain and snow are not keeping pace with the warming. So that means, basically,
Mm.
again, if we think about these balances, how much water is coming into the system, how much water is leaving the system. When you have a warmer system,
Yeah.
more water
Hmm.
leaves through the plants and through the soil. If you don't have
Right.
enough precipitation or rain or snow to keep pace with that, then the system dries out. And that's what we're seeing in
Right.
many parts of the boreal and many parts of tundra environments
Mm.
is that the system is drying out as it's warming. And a drier system means that there's more
Hmm.
fuel available for fire on the landscape.
Right. And a lot of
Yeah.
And
places and
more,
Makes
yeah, are
sense.
really dealing with like California, Colorado. I mean, even south, it's they're dealing with this hugely. Yeah.
yeah, and then coupled with that, and you've also dealt with this in various parts of the US, is that we've been very, very good at putting out fires for quite a long time. And so when you put out fires, it
Hmm.
also allows fuel to accumulate on the landscape.
Right.
Because the forests get bigger, they get denser, there's just more stuff to burn. And so
Hmm.
if you have more stuff to burn and it's drier because of climate warming, you have a situation where we end up with these very, very big fire years that we're seeing more and more of. I know you have the same
Right.
situation in the United States.
Hmm.
In
Sure.
Canada, year upon year, we're seeing unprecedented fire event, record breaking fire event. And then we had 2023 where the entire country was on fire
Yes.
and you were all
Yeah.
experiencing smoke from those widespread
Yeah.
wildfires.
Hmm.
That was
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was crazy. Yeah. I never thought about it as the warming makes it drier. That's so
Well, but it
obvious,
isn't.
though.
But
Yeah.
that's
Thank
where
you
it's
for
like it
making
is,
that
but it
obvious.
isn't. I mean,
Yeah.
it really it's like, oh my gosh, of course. When it's
Yeah.
explained, you're like, oh yes, of course, that makes sense.
And so the not only is there more fuel on the landscape, but there's different types of fuel that become available to burn. So things like wetlands, because you've got these
Right.
organic soils. If
Hmm.
if
Yes.
the surface soils are not
Right.
wet, all of a sudden those are very flammable locations, and
Everything
these fires
burns.
can smolder away through the soil, eating into those deep organic carbon stocks. Likewise,
Right.
very young forests, like for a very long time, fire managers have been able to rely on forests that are younger than 30 years to be pretty resistant to burning. That's
Yes.
changing.
Right.
So, in the places that I
Hmm.
work, there's more and more fires that burn through the winter. We
Yeah.
call these overwintering fires. So we're seeing
Mm.
fire behavior changing in response to climate warming.
Yeah.
And it's
And we're
also,
seeing,
sorry, it's
yeah,
also like this combination of, you know, native nations and used to be managing this for hundreds of thousands of as long as they were there. So taking that factor out because that was taken
yeah.
away, and then now add in this escalating sort of climate events.
Right. And the fact that the
Yeah, so
climate
it's like
acts
this double
differently now.
whammy of,
Yeah.
oh, this is why
Right.
that's happening as well.
Well, a triple whammy, there was, removal of indigenous fire practices in
Hmm.
many places,
Yes.
um, very effective fire suppression, and climate change. So it's,
Right.
a lot of,
Yeah.
kind of a perfect storm
Yeah.
to lead us to a place where fires can get very big and very, very scary and have and impact a lot of people.
And it's
Yeah.
like I never really made the
Hmm.
connection between major fire events and carbon release, right? So you were talking about, so there's two things happening. These fires are raging. And so obviously that's affecting the animals and everything that's living there. And that's a real, maybe you can talk about caribou at some point, but it's just going back to what you're saying before, that layer that we were talking about, that thick layer, or not all the time, when it dries, it's like this tinderbox. Like you think of what do you want to start a fire, but then you were saying too, it goes down into that. It goes down in deep into it. So you can have these fires burning underground for months and
Yes.
sometimes even years. And then what that is doing, correct me if I'm wrong, you were saying that is releasing this legacy carbon that's stored deep in there. Is that correct?
Yeah. That's so interesting. You know what word popped into my head before you answer is a
Mm,
carbon endowment. Like I think of an institution
right.
that has an endowment. It's eating away at our endowment that's
Yeah.
been there for a
Yeah.
long, long time. And as long as you are prudent with it, it lasts. But if you start to do too
Right.
much spending, quote unquote, then all of a
Yes.
sudden
Yeah, we
you're in a
often talk about
pickle.
that in kind of the
So
withdrawal versus deposit context, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
historically, what
Mhm.
we think happened was that, you'd have a fire event that happened, and then the soil organic layer would accumulate through the fire-free interval, and then another fire would come through. It would burn away some of that new carbon, but some of the new
Right.
carbon would be left. So that's your deposit. And all of the
Hmm.
old carbon would be
Right.
left. And now, as fires
Right.
get more severe, they're burning deeper, or they get shorter time between fires. We're starting to eat away at
Yeah.
all that new carbon. So our entire deposit gets spent. And we
Hmm.
start to dip into the,
Right.
the older deposits, or
Hmm. Hmm.
our endowment, so to speak, and we start to kind of
Hmm.
erode that overall
Yeah.
carbon stock that has been there for so long. So this is a big
Right.
concern, and something that can, a lot of the carbon scientists are talking about in the context of, you know, that this is something that can push the boreal toward being a carbon source as opposed to a carbon sink. So these big
Ah,
fire years, they release
Yeah.
huge amounts of carbon that can outstrip, many
Hmm.
components of the greenhouse gas emissions that we calculate for each country, right? So
yeah.
2023 was really astonishing in that way,
Mm-hmm.
with 15 million hectares of forest burning.
Ooh,
There was the
yeah.
greenhouse gas emissions
Right.
associated with that. The carbon dioxide equivalents um, were just astronomical compared to our national emissions.
Right.
So, there's that immediate
Hmm.
release, but then also if you're digging down into those stored carbon stocks, it's kind of a double whammy in a way.
So
Right.
how is the forest accommodating? Is it moving? Is it growing somewhere else? I mean, how is it sort of dealing with these major impacts?
So trees in the boreal forest and plants in the boreal forest have pretty amazing adaptations to fire. There's all kinds of things they do. Some species are serotinous. They have these cones that are coated in a waxy coating, and the
Oh, wow.
wax melts away when when it's heated up, and then the cones open on and release the seeds onto this fresh seed bed.
Hmm.
Other
Wow.
Right.
species resprout from below ground, so the above
Okay.
ground biomass, the above ground parts get killed, but the below ground parts are alive and they can resprout. So you can have an area that's burned and then a few weeks later it looks pretty green because all of the grasses and shrubs start to resprout pretty quickly. So amazing resilience and adaptations in the boreal biome, in the plants that live there for regular wildfire.
Okay.
So, this is something that the plants are well adapted to, and it's a really important part of forest renewal. The challenge is when we start to have these kind of novel fire behaviors. And so what we're seeing is that when these fires burn too deeply into the organic soil and expose mineral soil, that we tend to have a shift from conifer dominated, which covers much of the landscape, to broadleaf deciduous. So we'll shift from, say, spruce or pine to aspen or birch.
Okay.
That's an example. Or when fire return intervals get too short, we see those kinds of responses. If the mineral soil is exposed, those broadleaf deciduous species that are faster growing, they can take advantage of those better resources of the soil, better than the slower growing, more resource conservative conifers.
Right.
If the fire return interval is too short, those conifers don't have time to build up their seed bed that they store up in the canopies of their trees, waiting for a fire to come. So the forest isn't mature enough to be ready to burn. So these things can push the system from more conifer dominated to more broadleaf dominated. It's forest to forest. It's a different forest type. Different wildlife species use those different forest types. We have seen these changes in the past. So if we go back, take late cores and look at changes in tree species through time in response to fire, when there have been big, very fiery times in the past, we see these broadleaf taxa being more important on the landscape. And there may be benefits to that because broadleaf species, they store more water. They don't have the compounds that are as flammable. So conifers have all these compounds that really burn very well, right?
Sure.
So there's the potential that an increase in deciduous component on the landscape will slow fire on the landscape. That doesn't hold for really severe fire years, but it can help in sort of more ordinary fire years. So that's one piece. Another,
Well, I was thinking too, I'm just thinking if there different plants are growing, then different animals are going to be there. Is that fine? Is this just sort of a natural progression? Then if it's adapting, then everyone else will adapt along with it, and it's not necessarily a problem?
Well, it's not an adaptation issue, but rather, different species coming in who have the adaptations to deal with those conditions well. So if we see a shift toward, more, bigger expanses of deciduous forest, there'll be certain wildlife species like moose that will really, they love to browse on that kind of plant material.
Right.
Something like caribou, which you asked about earlier, it really likes these, all of the different subspecies of caribou, whether it's barren ground caribou, mountain caribou, boreal caribou, they all love to chomp on what we call caribou lichens. And those caribou lichens grow in forested areas. They grow in these open spruce and pine forests. And so if we have a shift toward, they don't do well under broadleaf deciduous trees because those leaves fall down and smother them. And it tends to be too shady as well. The canopy is too closed.
Okay.
So this is a really essential winter food resource for caribou. And so as we have more fire on the landscape and as it pushes the landscape toward a bigger deciduous component, the available winter habitat for those caribou will be reduced. So that's just an example of how,
that's a problem.
So depending on the community, the kind of foods they harvest, this may be a good thing, it may be a bad thing, right?
Right.
But there's a lot of concern about the impact of fire on caribou across northern Canada, across northern North America at this point in time, because a lot of our caribou populations are shrinking for various reasons.
So the other thing I want to go back to too is you're talking about the seeds and the cones. I didn't know they were covered in waxy kind of substance. Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just.
Yeah, that's how pine trees work. That's how all conifers
No, there's
work,
only a few of them
that
seal their cones that way. So a few species of pine, you have a bunch of them in the western U.S., even down as far as New Mexico, where they have these serotinous cones. So it's very much a fire adaptation. And some of those pine species lose that serotiny if they're in places that don't burn so frequently. So even within a species, there's variation in how, because you have to allocate resources to make that coating. So if you aren't burning regularly, you're at a disadvantage because then your seeds won't be released.
That's where I'm sort of
So
getting at, like
Right.
depending on then what these fire events and slash what's growing there, or how are then the seeds aren't getting into the ground if they can't sort of play out this process, so they're not being able to
so if
the
they
trees can't regenerate themselves.
so if the fire comes too close, if fires come too close together, then there typically will not be enough of a cone bank up in the canopy. So these seeds, these cones,
Right.
Right.
They haven't had
yeah,
time to
yeah,
replenish their
exactly, because they
seeds.
build up
Yes,
over
gotcha. Yeah.
years. So because
Yes.
the cones are sealed, they don't open.
Yeah.
So every year they produce cones, but they don't open every year. And so if you have enough time between fires, and you'll have enough cones to have seeds that fall down and replace the previous forest type. Likewise, if you have really severe burning and it exposes mineral soil, you may have great recruitment of those conifers, but they grow so slowly that they don't compete with the faster growing, more resource demanding species like aspen or like birch. So you'll
Yes.
have them there
Got
and they'll
it.
be about this big, and then the aspen will be about as tall as me, right?
Right.
So they get
Yeah.
they
Okay.
can't
So they
compete.
can't
Yeah.
compete.
So there's
Yeah.
biotic pressures, and there's also, the time to maturity of the stand for it to be ready to burn again. So both of those can come to play. And then we also have situations where no trees regenerate. So we're seeing that especially with these really short interval fires where
Oh,
fires
that's
are hitting the
bad.
system every
Okay.
10, 20 years.
Yeah.
We are seeing conversion to shrubland, conversion to prairie. And again, depending on the species you're interested in,
Right.
so bison love these open prairie areas.
Yes. Right. Right.
And for some regions in the territory that I work in, for example, that's a preferred food resource. So having a little bit more openness can be really good from a food security perspective. It can also be helpful from a fire management perspective, because it changes the fuel load on
Right.
the landscape and the way but it does change the way fire behaves. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
is what it's just so complex and just so also there's this sort of delicateness about it. So if I had to ask you, what's your overall concern? Is it carbon store and release? Is this one of the biggest sort of concerns that you have?
I mean, certainly that feedback is a really big concern, because the other component of all this that we haven't touched on is that not only is fire eating away at those carbon stocks, but the frozen ground underneath
Right.
that
The
organic,
permafrost.
underneath that soil layer, the
Okay.
permafrost.
Yes.
Obviously, permafrost is cold. As we heat up the planet, more energy is going into the ground. This is thawing permafrost more rapidly, and so this is also driving changes both in terms of land cover. So we can have changes due to there are a variety of mechanisms that permafrost thaw can drive land cover change, but also as that frozen soil thaws out, it unlocks carbon that has been locked away for a long time and makes it available for decomposition processes if those start to accelerate with warmer soils and all of that sort of thing. So this is also a major concern, and something that we have a lot of uncertainty around in terms of how much carbon might be released from permafrost thaw to the atmosphere. These are numbers that have huge uncertainty around them in any of the sort of climate change reports. So certainly that carbon piece, the thing that I would worry about most with the changes we're seeing from a boreal forest or a high latitude ecosystem perspective is that release of carbon as we warm the planet more and more, both through fire and through permafrost thaw. I think we do have a lot of uncertainty in terms of the land cover changes that we're expecting, because not only there's not just the changes I described with respect to fire and with respect to permafrost thaw, but as the planet warms, different species start to, we have different insect pests that are able to make a living better because the conditions are warmer.
They exist there.
There's different pathogens that may come into play in a way that they haven't before, either because the trees are stressed.
That's what I was wondering.
And we're certainly seeing evidence of that in some of our studies, where there's a new pathogen that is really very rapidly able to kill aspen. And so if you've got these shifts from spruce to aspen, and a lot of boreal forest ecologists would have said, okay, we're moving toward a more deciduous dominated boreal, this will slow the fire cycle. But if you then have a pathogen that comes in that can kill off those aspen, what does the future look like? So it makes it very, like, there's so many different moving parts. It makes it very hard to forecast
Yes.
where this is all going. And it creates a lot of uncertainty for communities that live in these places and rely on these lands.
Right, animal and human, right? I mean, that's really
Yeah.
true, and I think it's the escalation of it, or the speed of it is part of. It's just a huge player in that. So, what do we lose if we lose these forests?
Well, I would never say that we're going to lose these forests,
Okay.
right? I mean, we'll certainly, as we've seen, this is not the first time the climate has changed on the planet, and biomes have shifted around in the past. The challenge we have is that this is happening faster than we've seen in the past.
Right.
But we certainly are seeing tree line advance. So boreal forests are pushing slowly, and only in some places, but pushing slowly up into tundra environments. Probably the lower edge is going to shrink up. I think we expect that to shrink up a little faster than the northern limits would go. So we may see a contraction of the boreal biome for some period of time. But these are time frames. Trees operate on very long time frames. So it's really hard, really hard to make those predictions. Yeah.
But I like your answer
but
right
no,
off
I
the
don't
bat,
think
though. Like we're not going to lose them. That's helpful.
And right. And if you've never seen anything like this happen before, it's hard to make predictions, right?
Because what's your baseline?
Yeah, I think the thing people are, and I think the thing people are focusing on is what are ways that we can, are there management tools that we can implement at least around communities to keep human communities safer, or in places that we know are really important from a wildlife perspective or from a carbon storage perspective? Are there places that we can implement management tools that will help mitigate some of these changes? And so there's a lot of really great minds working on these problems, both in collaboration with Indigenous communities, say to reintroduce fire on the landscape, or with fire managers to say, okay, this is a really important carbon storage place, a really important permafrost place. We're going to manage it in this way so that we can reduce fire here or prevent fire here. So there are different tools that are being talked about and considered, and modeling exercises done. And so I think that's the challenge, is the vastness of the boreal biome and the remoteness of it. Many places have virtually no access. So management at a large scale is not possible, but these are the kinds of focused management interventions that people are talking about to try to think about how we might mitigate some of the biggest impacts to human communities or really important places on the land.
Yeah, it's like all heads together, right? I mean, collaboration and all the science from all the different communities. Like it's time to get on board and put heads together and figure out, because it, like you say, it's the speed of it. And it's true, because what you were saying before, like the history of the planet, it's natural for things to come and things to go and things to shift and species to come and go and change and all that. But it is the speed. So yeah, all heads together, right? Well, Jennifer, we end all our episodes with this question, and I'll put it to you. Why is this conversation important?
Well, so the boreal biome is a place that has a tremendous impact on, for people worldwide, both from a carbon perspective as well as from a freshwater storage perspective. The boreal biome stores a huge amount of the world's fresh surface water, but most people don't get there. They don't get to see it. They don't get to experience it. I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to work and live in this place as much as I do. And so just to be able to share some of what, tell some stories about what this place is like, why it's so important, why we need to be concerned about changes there, both from the perspective of the people and the wildlife and all of the biodiversity that lives there, but planetary health as a whole, which we all need to be concerned about. And I think that's the real relevance of this story.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, I'm not going to say everyone needs to go to see the boreal forest, because that's not possible for most of us. And yet, even looking pictures, this conversation to me, like this was just sort of the scratching the surface. Obviously, like how many things did we not talk about today? But the overall, I mean, if you can visit one, please do. They are magical and beautiful. And diverse. And I love what you said. And I think, it is important. And I think it's also connecting, sort of getting it out of sort of like that science headspace. And if you can experience this, sort of like look at pictures or listen to other podcasts that talk about them, and getting into that sort of the magical part of it. I've never been the same when I was walking around this forest that I was telling you. It's stuck with me like a fairy tale, the best type. And it's not all like that, but it really is. It's an incredible space. And just thank you, Jennifer, for coming in, like sort of speed throughing with this, because I know we only scratched the surface, but really appreciate the work you're doing, and just sort of taking us in and having us dip our toe into this conversation. So where can we follow more of your work, or you at the college or anything? Where can we learn more about this?
Yeah, I mean, certainly our lab has a website, so forestecology.ca, and
Okay.
we have various infographics and videos, and of course papers that people are welcome to read, but may not
Yeah.
may not want to. But some of the there's lots of plain language material there. There are a lot of great resources online for boreal conservation, information about boreal birds. Places like the Nature Conservancy and
Mm.
Boreal Birds Canada, and
Mm, yeah.
there's any number. I mean, if you
Okay.
Google boreal
Yes.
forests, any number of amazing resources will come up, both through government resources and NGOs, that you'll be able to learn lots and see
Mm.
some pretty amazing pictures and videos, and learn about all
Mhm.
the amazing components of this system.
Yeah, and if you ever happen to be close to any of the spaces on any other trips, or visiting, whatever, like try to take a hike into one a little bit. It really is incredible. Well, Jennifer,
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing your knowledge and science and all of that. I mean, I've got 100 more questions, and just these little things you're throwing out there, like, yeah, cones just have waxy stuff, and I just didn't know half of this stuff. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Kindred is hosted by me and my sister Jen, produced by Kat Gaddy and myself, sound production and editing by Dan Cooper, original music by Ellie Grace, and our Kindred artwork was created by Lindsay Coffin. Please follow, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and feel free to contact us through our website at kindredpodcast.co, where you can also find details about Kindred Plus, our subscription service, as well as links to our social media accounts and show notes.